This album kinda cheats, but cheaters always prosper, and Dylan doesn't care about the critical response. So he does this. He makes it a double album. More quantity, yet there's barely a drop in quality, if any. He puts out 14 songs, with over 70 minutes of music. Mostly bound by vinyl, albums in that era rarely go past 45 minutes. The pure significance of this fact is something to explore. Documented officially as the 15th double album of all time, although those above him were mostly live albums and compilations, Dylan effectively changed the game again forever, as so many others quickly followed. Such names like Donovan, Jimi Hendrix, Cream, and the Beatles. Most experts can agree this was the first double album for rock music. This album is so massive and had so many musicians on it. It's unreal the talent that was on this. It's really only comparable to something today, such as an all-star team in sports. There's even major speculation on who played what, when, and where. The band had a strong influence on the album, and Robbie Robertson contributed his talents on the electric guitar on multiple tracks. Then you have Kenny Buttery, who was quoted as one of the most influential session musicians in Nashville history. Charlie McCoy, who I shouldn't have to explain to you how good he is, as we've heard him on Desolation Row, along with multiple other Grammy Award-winning musicians, made this into a masterpiece. This was a gathering in the heart of music for America in Nashville, Tennessee. Combined with one of the best songwriters of all time in the peak of his career, this album did not disappoint and remains one of the best of all time. We will backtrack later in the Nashville talk, as the record was never intended to be recorded there. I don't need to convince many in saying how great of an album it is. I don't think anyone has or can rate this below an 8 out of 10 or a 4 out of 5. I would try to convince you that it's Dylan's best album. And I know Highway 61 Revisited and Blood on the Tracks are very much up there as well. But when you're competing with 14 songs, 5 of them singles, I think I can make a case for it. Now this is still a deep dive at heart, so we will talk about the history. Every great album starts with a name. Some albums embody stories behind it like Sgt. Pepper's, some are eye-catching like Pet Sounds, some stick with you like Rumors, and some just make no sense and have so much speculation on it that it has to be a Dylan record. Meet Blonde on Blonde, which Dylan states he didn't even come up with, saying, "I don't even recall how exactly it came up, but I do know it was all in good faith. I don't know who thought of that. I certainly didn't." Some make the connection to a play that Suze Risotto was in called Brecht on Brecht, or by other blondes in Dylan's life, or even because of the simple fact that it shortens out to spell out Bob, B-O-B. The album cover is interesting because it doesn't have his name on it or the title of the album. Of course, people had to start rumors and say it's blurry because Dylan was doing LSD, which, for the record, I absolutely hate that rumor and do not think he ever did it. The photographer cleared this up by saying, "It was freezing and we were very cold. The frame he chose for the cover is blurred and out of focus. We were just cold and the two of us were shivering. There were other images that were sharp and in focus, but, to his credit, Dylan liked that photograph." A lot of things had to fall into place to get the band with Dylan, which, as I said, definitely shaped this album. Dylan was gearing up for a huge tour in 1966, and after the summer of '65, Mike Bloomfield and Al Kooper didn't want to tour with Dylan again right away. After searching and some suggestions, Dylan made a pretty strong bond with Robbie Robertson, and eventually the band was formed to back Dylan on tour, in which you can see this in the documentaries No Direction Home and Eat the Document. Unfortunately, there was a lot of drama in the beginning stages of this album. For starters, producer Bob Johnson wanted this to be recorded in Nashville, but the VP of Columbia and Dylan's manager Albert Grossman jointly demanded Dylan to record in New York, saying, "If you ever mention Nashville to Dylan again, you're fired." On top of that, the recording sessions were not going well. Levon Helm quit, and Dylan was struggling. In the late months of 1965 and the beginning of 1966, some of the band and the Hawks were in the Columbia studios in New York starting to record the album. Dylan had to leave a bit because his son was born, but then he came back to a different drummer again. They desperately tried to complete a song doing 19 takes of it and not liking a single one of them. They switched out the drummer again and brought in other personnel. They successfully completed a song and liked it enough to make it a single, One of Us Must Know. the only one to be in the final cut of the album from the New York sessions. But that wouldn't be the only idea that survived New York, as we'll talk about later. Dylan would admit that the band didn't mesh correctly. "Oh, I was really down. I mean, in 10 recording sessions, man, it was the band. But you see, I didn't know that. I didn't want to think that." Once again, Bob Johnson suggested moving down to Nashville. This time, it reached Dylan and he accepted the idea. So now we go down to Nashville and assemble this cast of Hall of Fame musicians. But Dylan isn't even done writing. They're in the studio and Dylan tells them to take a break. Many hours later, he was done. But the songs were far from being finished. They were at least going through them articulately and not doing 19 takes of them. According to Robbie, the songs were just going by. Bob had a lot of material, so they were just going by ever quickly, just slamming through the songs. The Nashville environment was so much better than the one in New York. They were in the middle of America's greatest music city. The vibe was relaxed. Everyone got along and knew they wouldn't have to worry about each other because they were all great in their own right. They played as a team. Bob Johnson played a huge role in this when arranging the studio to his liking. He brought the musicians closer together and put Dylan in the center of the room. Dylan then had a piano installed in his Nashville hotel room, and Al Kooper would play the piano to help Dylan write the lyrics. Kooper would then teach the tunes to the musicians before Dylan arrived for the sessions. The hoops they had to jump through technology-wise is even outstanding. We have conflicting reports on what was used. Bob Johnson said in 1983 that an 8-track was used, but a Dylan expert who has every Dylan recording cataloged says it was a 4-track. In any case, I surmise either was impressive. Johnson had to use 3 different microphones to record Dylan alone. Johnson knows to do this now because of the first time he worked with Dylan and how Dylan would love to move around a lot while singing and playing. Johnson told everyone not to screw up as he wouldn't allow any overdubbing later. And I believe he stayed true to his word when they mixed the album in April of '66, then released it on June 20th, 1966. Well, of course there's speculation on the release date too, and I'll share some external media on this. Now let's talk about the music. It's very hard to know who played what on which song. Dylan wrote and sung on every song, we know that, but he didn't play harmonica on every song. He did not play harmonica on Obviously 5 Believers, that was Charlie McCoy. And strangely enough, for a rare time, Bob's official website credits him for playing lead guitar on Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat. He's the one beginning the song, but Robbie takes over, along with many others, and Robbie is the one doing the solos. I want to briefly break down each song and try to encapsulate the greatness of this album. It was recorded in all wacky hours of the night. Imagine waking up and immediately try doing your job at an all-time rate at 3 a.m. The album as a whole blends together the Chicago blues and New Orleans vibe with a certain rock and roll feel, with the lyrics of a poet stationed in America's heartland of sorrow and triumph, and embodies themes of love, lust, regret, imagination, and foolhardy fun. And fun we start with on the first track, Rainy Day Woman, number 12 and 35. Now this is already getting long, so I will break down this song to end part 1. You can all watch part 2 containing tracks 2 through 8, then part 3 with tracks 9 through 14, and the conclusion of this video essay. The inspiration for this song unequivocally comes from a Ray Charles song, Let's Go Get Stoned. Now, for the record, I love when Dylan is all silly and laughs on final mixes of tracks. This was no different. However, it's a song that really contrasts the whole album. It's goofy and has an array of sounds, while later parts of the album are much more serious and have lines sung with conviction. Bob Johnson remembers, all of us walking around, yelling, playing, singing. It should be noted that this song was done in one take, a huge difference from other songs on the record. Many can jump to the conclusion that this is a drug song, referencing getting stoned like smoking weed, which Dylan no doubt did at some point, a la the story where he got the Beatles high. Nevertheless, Dylan refused to admit that this was a drug song, saying, I never have and never will write a drug song, it's just vulgar. It doesn't help Dylan's case that when you multiply 12 and 35, you get 420, an infamous pot number. But again, Al even backs him up saying, no one was high. These were really professional people. They wouldn't do anything like that. The song title is creative as we see Dylan try to get fancy with the titles, like in Love Minus Zero, No Limit, trying to make that into a fraction. His idea for this one was in the right place, stealing a line from the Bible, chapter 27, verse 15, from the book of Proverbs. A continual dropping and a very rainy day and a contentious woman are alike, but the numbers do not match. If you like this vibe of breaking down each song like this, please watch part 2.